name's Nick Miller. I am a field engineer at Cursor. Really excited to be here with you guys today. Thank you so much for coming out. I work out of the San Francisco offices of Cursor in the US, and I'm a field engineer, which means that I mostly work with larger customers, larger companies that use Cursor, and I teach them how to use Cursor. I teach them how to use AI to write code and help them kind of adopt this new way of building that we are all experiencing. I started as a software engineer a long time ago, was eventually a product manager and a founder and a CTO. And like many of you, I kind of discovered AI late 2022 when ChatGPT came out. All heard about AI, but it wasn't really, for me at least, until that moment, things kind of came into color. And then in 2023, started to figure out that maybe these models could be pretty good at writing code, and was doing a lot of copying and pasting back and forth. And then for me personally, I discovered Cursor at the beginning of last summer, so about 14 months ago. And this is right when Anthropic released Claude 35 Sonnet, which was the first model to come out that you could really lean on to write the majority of your code. And it just completely changed my life. So I started working for Cursor at the beginning of this year. I was employee number 26. I think we now have close to 170 employees. So the company has grown really quickly. And in addition to working with our enterprise customers, I talk to a lot of groups like yours, which is my favorite part of my job. Usually from San Francisco, I do it over Zoom, but talk to groups all over the world, groups like this, about Cursor and having a dialogue with you guys about the product, the company, and kind of where things are going. So super excited to be here with you in person today. And again, really excited you guys came out. What I thought we'd do is talk just a little bit about where Cursor is going. You know, it's funny, when I started working at Cursor, we really had no roadmap. I mean, we were lucky if we knew what we were doing for like the next 6 weeks. Part of that was the development team the engineering team was probably 10 people, maybe 8 people. It was very small. And also the models were changing so quickly that it was hard to know really farther than a couple of months what the models would be able to do. So we always had this very small roadmap, never really knew what was going on beyond 6 weeks. And actually, a couple of weeks ago, we dropped our first real roadmap internally. I woke up one morning, a document was posted to Slack with a roadmap all the way to January. My jaw hit the ground. I was shocked that we actually had a plan like this. We now have about 40 engineers. We hired our first 2 product managers this summer. So we're starting to be able to kind of look a bit farther forward. So I thought we would just kind of start today by talking a little bit about where Cursor is headed, just to kind of give you a high-level overview and kind of like what some of our goals are for the rest of the year. And then I just want to open it up for Q&A, answer any questions you guys have again about the product, about the company, about kind of where the space is, about AI. Would love to have that dialogue with you. So first thing I want to talk about is this new release that is coming out this week, version 1.6. This is in an early release right now. So what we started doing as of a few months ago is when we have a new release that comes out, if you go to the Cursor settings and you go to beta and you change your release schedule to early access, you'll get the release actually before it is officially launched. And so 1.6 is out to early access and it's starting to roll out day by day to more and more people. By the way, one thing I forgot here. My email and my Twitter account. Please take a picture, write this down. Would love to communicate with you guys after the session, but beyond. Feel free to contact me anytime at those places. Would love to continue the conversation here. So nick@cursor.com or nickWM is my Twitter handle. So back to 1.6. So 1.6 is coming out this week. And we have started releasing at a faster pace with kind of smaller number of features, which in general I think is a good practice. So we're now releasing a new major release every 2 or 3 weeks. 1.6 is the latest, and there are 3 kind of key features that are coming out in 1.6. This is the one I'm probably most excited about, and it is custom slash commands. So for those of you that have used cursor rules before, when you create a project rule, it creates a .cursor directory and a rules directory inside of that .cursor directory. So now you can create a commands directory, and you can add as many markdown files as you want to that commands directory. You would title them the name of your command, and then when you are in the input box in the chat pane, when you press the /, you get a contextual menu, and that will now list all your commands that you can run. So to give you an idea, earlier today I was working on a Python API, it runs Fast API for its framework. You need to run a few commands to spin up that Fast API server. So what I did is I created a markdown file in my commands directory called start server. And I just in natural language in that markdown file just kind of gave the steps to start up the server and clear any conflicting port and then start up the server. And now anytime I want to start up that server, I can just go in the input box in my chat pane, press the / start up server, and that shows up in that menu, and I can run it, and the agent just takes care of it. So this is one of those like cursor tools that once you kind of get it into your workflow can be super powerful. So I'm most excited about this one in 1.6. We also have summarization trigger. So what this means is another / command. When your session is going long, your context window is getting larger and larger, you can now type / and choose summarize from the menu, and cursor will kind of compact the context window in that session. It's a much smarter way of compressing that context window than what we've done in the past. Now what we'll do is we'll look at a lot of files, a lot of the code in that context window, and we will replace it with kind of summaries or directory trees, which basically gives the model enough information to kind of know what's in the file, and then it can go out and read those files in the things it needs it. But it can really save you a lot of context. And especially with the way pricing is going and how you're now starting to pay for tokens, this can be a way to use the product in a more efficient way. And then lastly, we have extended our MCP support for MCP resources. So for those of you that are kind of MCP nerds, MCP supports these additional resources, files, database schemas, application-specific information that can be passed into Cursor, and that is now supported in 1.6. So if you guys don't already have 1.6, you should be seeing it any day now. Excited about this. 1.7 is in the works. It will probably come out hopefully before the end of the month, and even more exciting stuff there. So let's talk about kind of farther ahead, what we're looking at sort of as our goals, I'd say, for the rest of the year, maybe the next 6 months. First of all, a new agent layout. This is actually in beta in the 1.6 version. It's something that I've been using a lot lately, and I'm really excited about. What this does is basically reworks the user experience, so the focus is really on the agent. So, the traditional kind of Cursor user interface, you've got your file explorer, and you have a file editor, and then you have the agent over on the side. How many of you use the agent, the chat pane, as like your main tool on Cursor? Raise your hand. How many of you use tab, like just hands on keyboard typing as your main feature? And just out of curiosity, how many of you have used Cursor for like more than a month? Okay, what about like 1 day to 1 month? What about 0? You've never used Cursor. Okay, cool, good to know where people are. So just a step back, there are kind of a few different tools in Cursor that really make up the major tool set. On one end of the spectrum, you can be writing code as you normally would, just hand coding, and Cursor has what we call a tab feature, where it tries to predict what you're going to do next, and it gives you these suggestions. You can then hit tab and accept that suggestion. That's actually powered by our own model. An interesting fact, that model is in the top 3 models in the world as far as number of lines of code generated per day. So about half of our users use tab. It's very prolific model. On the other end of the spectrum, we have this chat pane where you can type in natural language prompts, ask the model to work for you, and basically it generates the code. And what we're finding is more and more people are kind of migrating over to using that chat pane as their primary tool. For me personally, when I first started using Cursor, I used the tab model. I was coming from a background of hand coding, and that was really powerful for me. But the more and more that I used Cursor, I started to use the inline edit tool. And now I use this chat pane for probably 95% of my work. It's just so fast. I've gotten really good at knowing how to prompt the model, so I typically get the output I want on the first try. And that's really how we at Cursor build everything. We have, as I said, probably about 40 engineers now, all super talented, and all came from a background of hand coding, and pretty much everybody writes code, builds Cursor using the chat pane now. Talking to the model, iterating on a plan, iterating on an idea until that plan is really tight, and then basically just passing that plan off to the agent, and it can build it typically in one shot if that plan is really tight. So this new agent layout is really for that approach to using Cursor. When you are really prompting the agent to do most of your work, you don't necessarily need to see the directory tree or the file explorer much. And you don't even necessarily need to look at the files themselves. The models have gotten so good at writing code, especially in the last few months, that in this interface, you can really just be talking to the model and let it work and not have to concern yourself very often with the files or seeing the file in an editor. So this is a new interface that, again, is in beta. Definitely not the only way to work. With one click, you can unfurl this into the standard interface where you can see the file editor and see the file explorer. But I've been using this a lot lately. It's just so nice to have that chat pane enlarged. Another thing that we have coming is a planning mode. So I mentioned to you that really all of the engineers at Cursor now build using the chat. And that experience typically starts with talking to the model, usually like a thinking model, like Claude 4 Sonnet or Claude 4.1 Opus or maybe O3, and having a conversation with that model, kind of building a plan of what you want to do. Typically that experience will be kind of laying out what you want to build, and then asking the model maybe if it has any questions or any suggestions, going back and forth and kind of having a dialogue with the model until you eventually kind of build out a really nice spec. And when I say build out a spec, typically this would be in like a markdown file. And then from there, you might switch to a non-thinking model and have the agent actually build out that spec. So the planning mode is an interface that we have been experimenting with that would allow you to kind of help you build out that planning process. And this is, we do a lot of testing, a lot of R&D. We play with a lot of stuff in-house. So I would say probably the majority of what we build never makes it out the door. But this is kind of one of the latest versions that we have been experimenting with. I think this is something that will come out in the early fall. But again, an interface that is really optimized for building plans and also tasks and subtasks, just to help you kind of with that process. So planning mode is coming soon, and I think definitely kind of fits nicely into the other agent interface. And then parallel agents. This is something that we are really focused on. So those of you that have some experience with the chat pane and Cursor, you know that you can launch multiple tabs. Each tab has its own context window and its own agent. And with those multiple tabs, you can actually have multiple agents running at one time. You could kick off an agent in one tab and it could run maybe on a longer duration task where it might be running for like 5 or 10 minutes. Then you can be in another tab working on something else and kick off an agent there. But it can be kind of clumsy. Those agents can kind of trip over each other. Sometimes they want to edit the same file. It'll stop and ask you to save. It's not the greatest experience. So we are working on ways to get agents to work in parallel in a more harmonious way, in a way that you really don't have to be there managing so much. This is just one interface that we've been playing with, where it's kind of a Kanban interface at the bottom here, and you can have multiple agents that you can toggle back and forth to, but they're all kind of optimized to have a more kind of cohesive interplay between them. And then sub-agents is another thing that we are hoping to roll out here in the coming months. The idea with sub-agents is that currently you kick off one agent to do a task. It might be a multi-step task, but basically there's one agent working on one thing at a time. And with sub-agents, what could happen here is that an agent could be kicked off on a task, a multi-step task, but it could then spawn sub-agents to do different parts of that overall task. So you might be asking to build something maybe pretty complex. Maybe there's a dozen different steps that need to be completed to build that entire prompt out. And this agent could then spawn sub-agents for different steps. And those sub-agents could even use a model that was optimized for whatever that agent was doing. So maybe one agent is setting up the architecture for what you're building, and then this agent could use a specific model that was optimized for architecture. So I think sub-agents are going to allow the whole system to run faster, to run smarter, to make less mistakes. And so sub-agents, we really see as kind of the next step function in this sort of AI-assisted development. It's being able to kind of have this master agent that then can orchestrate these sub-agents and do larger tasks. And then making the system faster. Probably a lot of you have the same experience with me. When I first started using Cursor, I felt very conflicted and guilty. I felt like I was cheating. I felt like I was maybe gonna lose my edge, my skills as an engineer. And then once I figured out how quickly I could build, how much fun it was to use Cursor, how much my quality of life had improved, I got over that pretty quickly. And then as I used Cursor, it blew my mind. And then as I use Cursor more and more, I think like most pieces of technology, once you kind of get accustomed to it, then it's really about speed, right? Anytime you use a tool that runs even just a little bit slower than your mind can work, it starts to feel like it's holding you back. And those of you that have some experience using Cursor, I'm sure you've had those moments where you will prompt the agent and it takes longer than you would like to respond and to build out whatever you're building. And so we've been very focused on speed, the way that we can really significantly increase the speed of the agent, of the models that you're calling, so it feels lightning fast, maybe even too fast, like you don't even have time to think. And so we have something coming out here probably in weeks that will be the fastest model experience you have ever experienced. By far the fastest model for coding that exists. We've just done a lot of work under the hood to figure out kind of how we can speed things up. And at least initially, I think it'll be a whole new experience for you. And really, you will prompt, and just the responses that come back will be lightning fast. So we're continuing to do a lot of work there on how we can speed things up. So that kind of gives you an idea of where we are headed, and kind of a high level idea, sort of the vision for Cursor. 6 months is kind of crazy, really, to plan at the speed at which this whole space goes. I think every couple months a new model comes out, and it's pretty shocking what it can do. So who really knows where we'll be in 6 months? A lot of the things that we build, we use internally, but some of these things we just can't release because the models aren't quite there yet. And then as soon as a model comes out that has the capabilities, the performance that we need to release something, we're able to release it. So it's hard to really know even where the models will be 6 months from now, but kind of based on where we are and what our goals are, this is kind of the vision. So wanted to open up to Q&A. If you guys have any questions about anything, would love to talk with you guys.
Hi. First of all, thank you for coming over from there. You will get free pizzas in a moment.
I will come to Italy any day of the year. Happy to be here.
Then move here.
Yeah. Be open to that too.
Now, my question is, you said you were teaching like big companies, big enterprise to how to use Cursor. What would be your first suggestion if someone is starting using it, or even if someone is actually using it? What would be?
Yeah, you're talking about what would be my suggestion specifically for a company adopting it, or even an individual
No,
user?
like if you already adopted an AI for coding, or like even Cursor, but what would be your suggestion to get the best out of it?
Yeah, so I, first of all, so the question was kind of what's your suggestion, if everybody can hear, but what's your suggestion to kind of when you're first trying out Cursor, what do I advise companies in kind of their initial adoption? The way that we work with companies is that we have a proof of concept trial that we offer companies. So we talk to a company, we get them interested in Cursor, and we say, we'll give you Cursor for a month for free. For you guys to try it out. And we would love for like you to get a third, even a half of your engineers in this trial to try using Cursor. So sometimes it's hundreds or even thousands of engineers. And it is my job basically to educate those engineers to do exactly what you're asking. So typically in that 4-week trial, I meet with them once a week. And in the first week, I just introduce them to the basics of the product. So the product is a few different tools, and it's really just kind of a tool set with several different tools, and you kind of figure out what tools are best for you, right? We kind of meet you wherever you're comfortable. So there's Tab, there's the chat pane, several different ways to use the product. And so that first session is just kind of introducing you to the tools. And that would be the first way I would start, is to just kind of get into the software and just start to play around and get a feel for the different features. Then in the second session, we talk kind of more advanced concepts, prompt engineering, context engineering, how to pick the right model for the right task. I think once you kind of learn the basic nuts and bolts of the product, those sort of nuances become more and more important for getting the best out of it. And you can learn a lot about that from our documentation, but also Twitter is, I think, Twitter's also a very horrible place, but Twitter is a great place for AI information. I think it's very real time. There are a lot of kind of AI influencers on Twitter that are posting a lot of information. And I think YouTube also has a lot of great videos. You want to be a little careful with YouTube that you're looking at videos that came out recently. Stuff that's maybe 6 months ago may not be so relevant anymore. But learning how to prompt, learning what a context window is, the importance of it, how to manage it, learning the different nuances of the models. I'm happy to talk to you guys about any of this today if you have questions. You kind of need to pick up those skills to really get the most out of the product. And it's just like with anything, all of you are engineers, all of you have had to learn a new language or framework. There's always that learning curve where it starts out and it's kind of difficult, kind of frustrating, doesn't go fast enough, but then you start to break through. And the same is true with Cursor. I think, in your first couple weeks of Cursor, you are kind of learning all these things, but then it really starts to take off and you'll see an acceleration. And then I think one other thing is the difference of building kind of a small project compared to a large project with Cursor. When I first started using Cursor, I was building all these, I was doing a lot of freelance development. I was building a lot of small things, a couple days or a week, and it was really easy with Cursor. It was like magical. And then the first project that I did that was really a long form project, it was like a 3-month project, I realized you really have to use these models in a completely different way. Once you're managing a large code base, you have to take many different sort of strategies around how to train's not the right word, but how to get those models to behave in a way that's going to be appropriate for a large code base and sort of different best practices around that. So I think that's kind of a more advanced level, but that would be another thing that we talk about. Usually like with an enterprise client, they have very large code bases. There's multiple engineers working on a team, and so you use Cursor a bit differently. But when you're just getting started, just doing small projects is a great way to start. And so any of the things we just talked about, happy to dig deeper into any of that if anyone has questions on it. Yes, here, I'm going to pass you the mic so everybody can hear.
Hi, Nick. Nice to meet you. Actually, my question is pretty similar to his. It's what are your suggestions about the good habits that I should develop in my daily usage of Cursor to get out the most of Cursor? Thanks.
Yeah, definitely. I can go through some basics. So first of all, let's talk about prompt engineering. So prompt engineering is a term that kind of came out in 2023. ChatGPT came out, and people started to realize as they were playing with ChatGPT more and more, like there were all these different ways that you could prompt it to get really interesting output. And so this term prompt engineering started to emerge, and that's basically a term of kind of how to write a prompt to really, get the best output in the format that you want and kind of in the first prompt that you made. And so prompt engineering is really important with Cursor. I think that's sort of the first learning curve, is that most people, when they first start using Cursor, they will, submit a prompt and won't really get back what they wanted, and then they'll ask the agent again, and it's not quite right. But after you've used it for a little bit of time, you start to learn how to talk to the model and really get the expected results typically with the first prompt. So prompt engineering is important. And I think kind of one underlying thing, kind of one important best practice around prompt engineering is it is best to submit more prompts with less tasks per prompt, as opposed to like submitting one prompt asking the model to do like 12 different things. For example, if you are like at the end of like building a feature or a project, you usually have like this laundry list of like, let's say a dozen different things you need to clear to get this thing to the finish line, right? Little bugs you need to fix, little things you want to polish. It just seems like, as they say, like the last 10% of the project is like 90% of the project. There's always like all these odds and ends, right? In that sort of situation, much better to ask the model to kind of do those one at a time, or maybe a couple tasks per prompt, than giving it one prompt with all dozen things. Typically, when the model has less it needs to pay attention to, the better it's going to do. So when you're thinking about prompting, I think that is a good approach. And Cursor actually released some nice updates in the chat pane that I think make this a little bit easier. When you submit a prompt now, and the agent is working, you can actually submit additional prompts. If you hold down the Option key and hit return, with each prompt that you submit, while the agent is working, it will actually queue those prompts. So once it finishes the first prompt, it'll go on to the next one, go on to the next one. So in that example where maybe you have a dozen prompts, you could submit that first prompt, and then you could start submitting all the others, holding down the Option key and hitting return to submit them, and it would queue those up. If you submit the prompt now without holding down the Option key, Cursor will actually insert that prompt into the agent's current work at the next opportune time, so you can kind of further steer the prompt. You might submit a prompt, and then after you submit it, you realize, oh, I forgot this one detail. You can now just submit that additional detail, and Cursor will insert it into the model's thinking, which is pretty nice. But holding that option will queue it. So best practice around prompting, just less tasks per prompt is really the best approach. And then context engineering is another really important thing to think about. So what I mean by context engineering is the context window. So what's interesting about these models is that they have incredible long-term memory, meaning that they're called general purpose large language models. They have been trained on just an insane amount of information. You can go to like ChatGPT or you can go to Claude. You can ask a question about pretty much any topic and just get this really informed answer back, right? But they actually have no short-term memory, meaning that when you submit a prompt to the model and it responds to you, it does not retain any memory of that exchange after it responds to you. And so when you use something like ChatGPT or you use Cursor, and as you're continuing to prompt, you get this feeling that like there is a short-term memory, it remembers your conversation. It's actually the software that you're using that is kind of building this scaffolding around the model to give you that perception of a short-term memory. The way Cursor is doing that is when you submit your first prompt in that chat pane, it goes off to the model responds. And then when you submit your next prompt, Cursor includes all the relevant details of all the prompts that came before it in that section to kind of build up that, what we call context window. So the context window is kind of the short-term memory of the model. So as you're continuing to prompt in that chat pane, your context window is growing larger and larger. Every subsequent prompt that you're submitting in the chat pane, Cursor is picking out all the relevant details that came before that prompt in the chat session and including those so the model kind of has an awareness of the whole conversation. If you think about it, like if you're fixing a bug and maybe it takes like 6 prompts to finally fix that bug, it's a really difficult bug. even though it's not till the 6th prompt that you fix the bug, there's probably a lot you learned in those first 5 prompts that kind of help you get to that 6th prompt to clear the bug. So that context is important. So what is context engineering? The models, again, do best when they have less to pay attention to. So it is really a best practice to start a new chat session, clicking that plus button at the top of the chat pane, a new session, which will be a brand new context window. Start a new chat session with every new focus of your work. If you let your session go really long and you're really jumping around to a lot of different topics, you will find that there will be a degradation in the quality of the output of the model. In fact, OpenAI released a paper earlier this year. There was a graph, and on one axis was the accuracy of the model, and the other axis was the size of the context window. And as the size of the context window grows, the accuracy of the model goes down. So start a new session with every focus of your work. If you let that session run for a really long time, if you jump around, the model will have a harder time kind of knowing what to pay attention to, and it'll degrade the quality. So I think those are two important, really, those are like the first 2 things I would teach, the first 2 things you want to pay attention to. There's a lot of information out there. Just a couple other kind of quick things. Rules are super important with Cursor, especially with larger code bases. If you want to better control the model's behavior, rules are extremely important. If there are questions around that, we can talk about that. We can also talk a little bit about kind of kicking off an agent on a longer form, more autonomous task. So when I am talking to an agent in the chat pane, I'm usually using it in one of 2 ways. Kind of just one-off things like fix this bug, polish this. But sometimes I will prompt it to do something that might take many minutes, it might take many steps. And with that sort of approach, I think, as I was talking about, writing a really good spec to start, going back and forth with the model and getting a really tight spec. But then once you've got that spec in a markdown file, asking the model to create a checklist of all the tasks that are in that spec. So create a second markdown file and list every task that we need to complete to fulfill this spec. Group those tasks maybe in phases, order them in a logical sequence. And then once you have your spec and you have your second document that is a checklist of all the tasks from the spec, then ask the model to go ahead and build out this feature per this spec, and you can reference your long-form spec. And as you build it out in the order of the tasks in the checklist and check off each task as you go. By giving the model a checklist, it will be able to manage itself a lot better. And with a longer duration task, it will stay on track. It'll kind of always keep in mind the bigger picture. Sometimes if you ask the model to do a longer duration task and you don't give it that checklist, it'll kind of get lost, especially if it goes down a rabbit hole on like one of the parts of the spec. It'll kind of forget the bigger picture of what it was doing and maybe stop prematurely. And that checklist really allows you to stay on task. Also, you can look at that checklist as it's working, and you can see in real time exactly where it is in the list of tasks. You know exactly what it's done and what it hasn't done. So those are some kind of key things that I teach and I think are really important in getting the most out of the product.
Just a technical question. I could have a big project with a lot of files, a lot of classes, for example, if you work in C# or Java. How Cursor can build a little as possible context to include the right files to answer to the question? Because there is a need for I assume a static code scanner. It's just a technical question.
Yeah, so when you connect Cursor, when you open up a new project in Cursor and you connect it to a code base, Cursor indexes the entire code base. So it is reading every single file and it is creating an index in our cloud infrastructure of that code base. Yes.
Okay.
And then when you ask the model, so all of the tools in Cursor, tab, the inline edit tool, and the chat pane are connected to that index, so they have a full awareness of the code. So in the chat pane, if you prompt the model to do something, and it doesn't already have the code it needs to complete your prompt, and it would already have the code because it had generated it in that chat session, or maybe you had attached it. Again, this is the context window. So if it doesn't already have the code it needs in the context window, it will use the index to search the code base to find it. And that is kind of some of the magic of Cursor. Now you can also attach the files. When you're in the input box in the chat pane, you can press the @ symbol, you get a menu, and there's a lot of different contexts you can attach, including files and folders. For me, on a larger code base, I typically will attach the files or folders that it needs instead of having it search. It feels more precise to me. And with like a really big code base, again, every second counts. It might take a couple seconds for it to find the code it needs. By attaching it, I just know it has what it needs. But it's that indexing mechanism that's how it has that awareness. Yeah.
You spoke about cursor rules, which became quite a standard among many items. Now we're talking about this Rockland file calling agents. Will that replace cursor rules?
Yeah.
Any differences?
Yeah, so agents.md is just kind of quick step back on cursor rules. So cursor, first, for those of you that have been using cursor for maybe more than 6 months, which is like a lifetime in cursor years, we had a .cursor rules file, which was just one file where you could put in your cursor rules, and that was could be like a just natural language, a list of rules. And then this year we released a new version of cursor rules where you go into the settings, you go to the rules tab, and you can create project rules, and there are different types of rules you can create. And when I was talking about version 1.6, there's the .cursor/rules directory. Each one of the rule sets that you create gets added as a markdown file there. And we have like 4 different types of rules. There's always rules, there are agent applied rules, a few different types. But the file that you're talking about, there is we're not the only product in town. There is Claude Code. There are other products out there, and they each kind of have their own rules and kind of ways of storing them. And so agents.md seems to be maybe a standard that is starting to evolve across some of these products to share rules. So the reason why we started supporting that is that off the top of my head, I can't remember what products use agents.md, but let's say that you use Claude Code and Cursor, and you have rules set up in an agents.md file for Claude Code. This would allow you to basically bring that same file into Cursor, or open up the code base in Cursor and Claude Code, and have both products be able to read the rules from the same file. So an agents.md rule set is going to get applied to every single prompt. So it's basically just an option there if you're using other products that can read that, and maybe agents.md is going to be a standardization. I will say that, just kind of going back to the context window and thinking about rules. So what rules are basically these files, these instructions that you can add that Cursor will attach to the prompts when they get sent to the model. So there is, see the nice, you guys want to watch the animation? If I get too boring, I can go ahead and hit play. I need to run this a little bit longer. So there are always apply rules. So you can create a file, one or more files, and set it as an always apply rule type, which means that every single prompt that you submit to the model is going to include all the rules in that file. There's also apply intelligently. That's another rule type. So you can create a file that is an apply intelligently rule set, where you can give the agent a certain scenario when those rules should apply, and then they'll only get invoked in that sort of scenario. You can have rules targeted to specific files, like any file with a .py extension. That's another type of rule. And then you can also manually apply rules. The reason why this is important is going back to your context window and also your prompts. If you have an always apply rule, let's say, and let's say in that rule you have like 50 different things that you're telling the model to do. Every prompt that you submit to that model, you're going to say, hey, model, do this thing, and oh, by the way, do these 50 other things at the same time. again, when you think about like really trying to have a very narrow lens when you're prompting the model, trying to kind of stay with one really singular storyline, not asking to do too many things per prompt, you are not going to get as good results if you have an always apply rule that is telling it to do all these different things with every single prompt. So I personally, when I'm building my rules, my always rules, the rules that are going to get attached to every prompt, I start super simple. Maybe like what version of the language I'm running, kind of just the basics that the model really needs. And then when the model is telling me it needs more help, that is a cue for me to add in more rules. So if the model is like making the same mistake more than a couple times, it's getting confused about the same thing more than a couple times, those are cues to me that I probably need to add another directive to my rules. But I highly recommend taking that approach as opposed to just like starting with this really long list of rules, trying to catch any possible thing that might happen. Better to start really simple and then kind of build brick by brick when the model is telling you it needs more help. And then if you do have a really long rule set, let's say like you work on a team of engineers and you guys all have like, you have a certain style guide, like how you like, what, you know, the case that you use for your, how you name your variables, if you use tabs or spaces, like maybe all these things that everybody should comply with. Something like that, I would set that up as like a manual rule. And then on a regular basis, I would like audit my code and attach that rule. And that way, just, I would say like, you know, review this file and make sure that it's in full compliance of my team style guide, and then attach the manual rule. And then that one prompt is basically about going through all these different stylistic things, as opposed to asking the model to do one thing and then also do all these other things. I think you'll get better results then.
We said the rules are actually like kind of system prompt.
Yes, the rules are kind of like your own system prompt. Cursor has its own system prompt that it's firing. So when you submit a prompt, it's what you wrote, it's the context the Cursor is picking up from your chat session, it's the Cursor system prompt, and it's the rules. And rules are very much like your own personal system prompt, definitely.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Oh, you're done. I'm coming back. I've been playing with cursor commands for some times, and it's super cool. I've seen that it would be great if I would be able to set or define some parameters within commands that should be required when I fire a command.
Yeah.
Just to give an example, I'm trying to model the spec then code methodology with that, and I would require as mandatory some parameters.
Yeah.
Is that something that's coming?
Yeah. So we call that hooks, and hooks are coming very soon. Super excited about hooks. What hooks are is you can, I think there's going to be like to start, there's going to be like 6 or 8 trigger points for hooks. And basically what this means is that, so like one trigger point will be when you submit a prompt to the model. Another trigger point would be when the model responds. Another trigger point would be like when the model updates a file. Another might be when an MCP server is called. And basically you can attach one or more hooks to any of these trigger points. And those hooks can call a script or call a markdown file. So let's say that you wanted to log every single one of your prompts to like your own database. You could set up a hook where basically every time you submit a prompt, that would be the trigger. It would call this hook, and then the hook would call that script, and you would be able to pass the prompt or whatever the relevant data was depending on the trigger point. So this is me working with a lot of enterprise customers. They always have very specific needs around security or reporting or whatever. You know, we, even with 40 engineers, we still are like, you know, we're drowning in things we need to do. And so hooks we're really excited about because you can now kind of build all these additional actions into Cursor and kind of build your own stuff. So hooks, and you will be able to pass things like the prompt data or what the MCP server came back, whatever, and do all this additional work. And I think there may be kind of this new ecosystem of like hooks that people build in open source too, which could be really cool. Kind of like what MCP servers have done. But I think hooks will be at a whole another level.
Thanks, Nick, for the presentation, by the way. I've been a Cursor Pro user for the last 5 to 6 months. And I'm also that kind of person who keeps experimenting with all these tools that is coming out in the market. Let's say mainly the agentic CLI tools like Gemini or Thoughtcode. So my question is basically, when I use the same model, let's say if I'm using Cloud Code or Cursor, there seems to be a bit of difference. Not at all times, but let's say sometimes in a good way, sometimes also in a bad way. So do you have like some kind of middleware in between where you kind of optimize the prompt or you do some kind of pre-processing of the prompt in order to make the response better, let's say?
Yeah, definitely. So the question here is that you can, Cursor is not the only tool in town. You could use Cursor, you could use Windsurf, you could use Claude Code, but you could select the same model in all those. Let's say Claude 4 Sonnet. And the results can be different from one to another. So I can speak to Cursor in that when you submit that prompt to Claude 4 Sonnet, in addition to the prompt that you're writing, we have our own system prompt that we're shipping. And our system prompt is a bit different for every single model. So we, as soon as we get our hands on a model, we're doing a whole series of evals to understand its personality, its strengths, its weaknesses, its quirks, and we are refining our system prompt to try to get you the best and most consistent output with every prompt. So our system prompt is included with your prompt, the context, the way we're managing that context and picking out those important details. When you're working in a chat session like that, it's again the software that you're using that's kind of creating that short-term memory, not the model. Rules, also kind of the way we weave rules. So there is a lot going on there, in addition to what you're writing that is going to be specific to the product that you're using. And then also, we can take it a step further. Beyond the tab model, we also have other models that we have built that run under the hood, one of which is when the code comes back from the model. One of our models is actually applying it to your files. So there's a lot of nuance with the product that you're using. And, it's funny, the conversation goes back and forth. When products like Cursor and other products that sort of run on top of these frontier large language models first started coming out, everybody's like, they call them wrappers, because you're wrapping around the model. Everyone's like, these companies aren't going to go anywhere. It's really the model is where the value is. And then once more and more models started coming out, and right now there's probably like a half dozen models that are all great for coding. Now they're all saying, it's the wrapper that is really sort of where the strength is. That's the secret sauce, because all the models kind of do the same thing. Anyway, this gives you an idea, though, of why kind of each wrapper, each program is kind of taking a different approach, and that's why you're going to get different results.
I heard multiple times that one of the best way to get the most reliable results is like to use an approach like test-driven development. I would like to know your thought about this.
Yeah, so the models are what we call non-deterministic. So what that means is that you could open up Cursor and you could submit the same prompt to the same model 5 different times, and you'll probably get kind of the same end result every time, but that model could write the code very differently from one prompt to the next. And as somebody who does demos for enterprise customers all day, it can be very frustrating because what happened this morning is not what's going to happen this afternoon. So it's hard to get consistent results, but not to scare you, but that is sort of a twist. But yes, test-driven development, I think, is a great way to work with these models, especially with larger code bases. First of all, for those of you that do test-driven development, and some of you don't, I was definitely one of those people that hates doing test-driven development. I understand the importance of it, but I hated writing tests. I hated maintaining the test suite. It took so much time, and it was just not fun. Now it's great that the models can write all your tests, which is great. So I love that. I'm doing way more TDD now that the models will write and maintain the test for me. But yes, the great thing about test-driven development with using these models is that you can basically have them check their work. So especially when you are prompting the model to do like a longer duration task, I might ask the model to build an API with these 4 endpoints and it should be able to have these calls in it, and then the model will just go to work for like 10 or 15 minutes and build that thing out. What I like to do when I'm doing a prompt like that, a longer form prompt, is give it away for it to test its work. That will just get you closer to production ready code, right? So if you can prompt it to do something long form and then also give it away to test its work, then it will build everything out, and then it will go ahead and run those tests. And if anything fails, it will come back, refine the code, run the test again, and it'll kind of get into a circuit there until all the tests run. So maintaining a test suite is a great way to allow these models to check their work. And at the speed at which you work with a model, you're building a lot faster, and so you can be introducing a lot more technical debt, you can be introducing a lot more bugs, maybe you're not quite as intimate with the code anymore and catching things. And so asking the model to run the test after every change it makes is a great way to keep things in line. And you could create a rule for that. You could create an apply intelligently rule, for example, where the task would be anytime you update a file, and then the rule could be run this test suite and make sure that the changes that you applied are clear. So it's great. I still build sometimes without it, but it is a great way to keep things in line, especially for longer duration tasks.
Just let me add one thing just before we close. So we can take just two questions more. But before that, just some few details about the organization. So we are taking two more questions, then we are moving there for the pizza and for some networking. So before that, I want to give you special thanks to a couple of friends that are here and that helped us to organize this event. They are friends from several days, and please, Francesco, Marco, and Vincenzo, if you are here, just join us, because actually we are live streaming with several days. Thanks to them, we are providing the live stream for all the people that couldn't make it tonight to be here. And I'm going to just steal the monitor for 1 second in order to thank them for their support and to tell you that one thing that we are doing with Cursor community, since Cursor is something which is quite agnostic about the code that you write, about the language, about the kind of stuff that you do. So our goal is to be able to provide for all the community the opportunity to work together. Here we have Luca Fioso from Codemotion, and we are partnering with them. We are partnering with the folks from Serverless Italy. Either Codemotion is going to have a conference in the middle of October, and the folks from Serverless Days offer a 50% discount on Serverless Days Italy, Serverless Days Milano, which is happening on October 21st. So our idea as Cursor is to be a hub where we can work with all the community, we can bring the collaboration about how AI-assisted coding development or even vibe coding can support each one of them. So we will be giving talks to Codemotion, we will be giving talks to Serverless Days Milano, and we're collaborating with other communities, because we think that in this way we can make network, and we can also help other people to join our community and then share the knowledge about that. So I want just to special thank you for this live streaming and the support that you gave us. Thank you.
Hey, Nikki, thank you so much for the presentation so far. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about the engineering culture that you guys have at Cursor, because coming from a company where we mostly write our own code, I was wondering how do you guys ensure quality and everything else on Cursor?
I think we are definitely unique in the way that we work, and I'd like to think that we are kind of the bleeding edge, kind of where things are going, I think, in the engineering world with teams. We have a very flat structure. And what I mean by that is kind of all the engineers, there's not like a lot of hierarchy. There's not like engineering managers. There's not a lot of structure in terms of like QA. As I mentioned before, like we didn't even have product managers until like a month or two ago. And so it is very flat. People kind of work on what they want to work on. There's not really clear divisions in the focus of the work because the models are so good. You might have an engineer that is working on the product, but might also get into infra and could kind of touch a lot of different things. The teams are very small. Often one person is working on a feature, maybe two. And it's not just the engineers. Because the agents are so good, and because we have built a lot of tooling that makes it really easy to interact with code, we have one model repo that we call EverySphere. AnySphere is the name of the company that owns Cursor. So EverySphere has all the code for everything that we offer. You can basically just open that up in Cursor and talk to the model. So for example, a designer who is not an engineer might design something, build a prototype, and then actually build that feature out, and it gets merged into main. Me, myself, I'm a field engineer. I work mostly with enterprise customers, but right now I'm working on a couple features for the IDE that my enterprise customers want. The enterprise engineering team doesn't really have time to do it right now, but because of the way Cursor works, we can do that. So, and even like the sales team, the go-to-market team, if they have questions about how like the logic works for a specific feature, before Cursor, you would have to like track down an engineer and ask them that question, and that person might need to like go into the code and read the files and kind of know how the rules work. And now they can just ask Cursor, they can just ask the agent. So very flat, we move really quickly, and we use BugBot for all of our QA. So for those of you that aren't familiar with BugBot, this is a new service that we released this summer, something that we've been using for many months internally. And basically what BugBot is that anytime you post a PR to GitHub and soon to other Git services, BugBot will immediately review the code in that PR and look for any bugs that might occur once you merge that PR into the branch it's destined for. Any bug that it finds, it posts as a comment to the PR page. It explains what the bug is, shows the relevant code, and then there are links there where you can open that code and fix it in Cursor or launch a background agent. BugBot scaled from 0 to, I think, $10 million in revenue in its first month. It's been hugely successful for us. 2 people own that feature and built it. By the way, we're trying to hire 4 more people for that team. If any of you want to move to San Francisco or New York and work on it, we're looking for people. But BugBot does all of our code review. It's crazy. So it's not like we have some QA team. I mean, we do have some people that do QA, but we again are really leaning on these models to take as much of that kind of development life cycle and automate it as we can. It makes it really exciting and really fast. Yes, I think this is the last question.
We have more time.
Okay.
They just told me that a few people are late, so.
Great. You tell us when we need to stop.
Thank you. What about making it safe? One of the main concerns from a legal and compliance team is how can we prevent engineers from doing stupid things like sharing PII or protected data with the mock? Can we run it locally? Because it's a typical question I get from the legal team, and I have no answer. I know that the typical answer from engineers is we have the private mode, but is the private mode enough to prevent reputable business from sharing data, personal data, protected data with those models? Thank you.
Yeah, so this is a conversation I have every single day. As far as PII goes, it's really up to the person using Cursor to not expose that data, right? So you want to make sure that you're not connecting a database or passing files or anything that has that data. And typically that is less of an issue. That data usually would be in like a production database or something. You'd be in a development database, but really, as far as PII goes, it is up to the engineer. However, hooks is really interesting way that you could potentially add some safeguards there, right? So with hooks coming soon to a cursor install near you, every time you submit a prompt, it could kick off a hook that could then inspect that prompt. This would be your own script that you write, looking for any PII data in that, and then prevent that prompt from going out to the model. So hooks is one, for me, working primarily with enterprise, something I'm super excited about, because this stuff comes up and it's like we don't necessarily have a good kind of framework yet for you to build your own safeguards there. As far as security in general, this is like a whole new world. Every single enterprise customer that I work with, some of the first meetings we have are about security. These are companies that are rightfully so really worried about their code leaving the building. Before AI development, you would install an IDE on your computer and you would write code. You're basically just editing the files on your computer. But now with a product like Cursor, your code's shipping off to Anthropic, to these large language models. It's getting indexed and being stored in our infrastructure. And so there's always this conversation that we have with companies about kind of what these safeguards are. Typically, the way that conversation goes is like they're totally freaked out at first because they've never done anything like this before. And then, they kind of slowly loosen up a little bit and realize this is kind of the new way of doing things. And we have a really conservative security posture. So one place that code kind of leaves your computer is getting sent off to the large language model. Every single model provider that we work with, Anthropic, OpenAI, Gemini, etc., we have a zero data retention policy with them. So what that means is that the prompt goes out, it gets processed, sent back to us, they clear it. They never look at the code beyond being able to process the prompt, they never train on the code. So there's no data retention there. And then the indexing that we were talking about, or when you connect your code base to Cursor, it indexes the code. That is stored in our infrastructure, but in vector embedding. So there's no plain text code. We can't see the code there. It's basically just set up in a way where we can point your IDE to the right places in the local files to edit. You can even bring your own keys. We have CMAX support for that. So, once you kind of talk about the safeguards that are available, then the companies start to get more comfortable. Most of them, some are still kind of freaked out. But for example, customers that I work with, Broadcom, NVIDIA, these are companies where their IP is worth, who knows, just an insane amount of money. They're very, very worried about it getting out. And they're comfortable with kind of the agreements we have with these labs as well as how we're handling the indexing. But it's a whole new world. And the stuff like around PII, some of that stuff just isn't solved here. We also have other things like we have a cursor ignore file that you can exclude files from the index and also exclude files from being passed to the model. However, what we can with 100% accuracy prevent what goes into the index. However, we can't with 100% accuracy prevent what goes to the model. Again, because the model is non-deterministic, I can give it 100 lines of rules of not passing this to the model, and the model may still do it, right? So there are some things there where you maybe are not going to store any like sensitive keys or anything to production in the what you're working with. There's some things you need to do there, and hopefully that stuff will get solved. But again, hooks can be a good thing there, right? In addition to PII, you could create a hook every time you prompt the model that looks for any sort of sensitive keys or anything like that. So we're really excited to get that out.
I have a question. So the way that you store, the way that you index the code is vector embeddings, right? Do you have a private re-ranking about the embeddings, or you don't use none of that? Re-ranking.
Yeah. So
this can get really nerdy. First of all, if you really want to get into the details on the indexing, if you go to cursor.com/security, there is a section there on indexing that gives you a really good kind of overview of how we do it. And if you want to email me, I can even send you some architecture documents if you really kind of want to get into the nitty gritty of how we do it. But I think the big takeaways are that when we're indexing the code, these embeddings are basically just ones and zeros. And what they allow the system to do is point, when for example, you prompt the agent to do something and it doesn't have the code it needs. With these vector embeddings, in our infrastructure, we have enough information with the ones and zeros to know where to point the IDE in your code to find the code without actually being able to see the code. And so it works really well. So it is, I think it's the only way that we can really make Cursor work with any kind of company that is concerned about security. There was a white paper that came out this year that said maybe you could reverse engineer this. But again, with another layer where we allow the company to provide their own key if they want, pretty much everybody's comfortable with it. And you really need this indexing to make Cursor work.
You said that sometimes the team is a single person, and
Usually.
usually, okay. And I was just, I don't know, as a CTO, I'm kind of worried sometimes that people are just taking their own path and they are, I don't know, having their own hallucination without even using AI. So I was thinking, how do you kind of ensure the quality of what is actually produced by the person, not taking care of the AI. I mean, you can write yourself or you can use AI, but how do you ensure that the outcome is actually something that is going to scale or it's going to work correctly, it's going to, I don't know, how do you ensure all of that?
Yeah, so I think there's maybe two considerations there. As far as the code itself, we are using the models to write the code. We're not really typing out much code anymore. So we really trust the models, and it's a well-structured code base. We have good rule sets. Really smart people are building this. We're not letting a lot of slop get through. But we really trust the models to do well, and we iterate. So we are typically, we are dogfooding everything. We use Cursor. We build Cursor with Cursor. So the first versions that are being built are not necessarily built optimized for speed or efficiency. And once we kind of prove out a concept, then we'll continue to iterate on that and clean it up. So I think as far as the code itself goes, we really trust the models, and just that, we really know how to prompt well, and we've been doing this long enough that we get good output. As far as it's now 40 people all working at the same time. There's also just coordinating all of that, right? And I thought it was insane that we didn't have product managers. And we had some for those of you that were around for release 0.46, I mean, we had some low points for sure in the stability of our releases. Once we started signing customers like NVIDIA, we realized maybe we need to slow things down a little bit and do a little more testing. So having product managers now, kind of coordinating what everyone is doing, and then also having a build point person that when we're doing a new release, someone that really owns what is going to be in that release, what makes it, what doesn't. We're typically kind of refining that what is going to be in the release down to the day or day before. Some things just won't make the cut. So there is definitely some management there of how everything is fitting together. But we really trust the models, and it's kind of shocking to me, and BugBot really does a good job. It is a new way of working, and I think that everybody will go at their own pace. We're certainly not trying to eliminate engineers. We don't really see that happening, at least not for a very long time, and I can talk about why that is. But I do think that we are getting farther and farther away from the code. The models are going to be writing more and more of the code, and we're going to be more about managing those models, prompting those models, but not necessarily having to be intimate with every single line like we used to be. And I think this sort of approach definitely, takes that kind of way of building.